When I was growing up and I saw a game that was on the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3, I thought it was the most interesting thing ever. Video games in my early childhood were played on the PlayStation 2 and for a time even on the PlayStation 1. And the cool thing about being a kid is sometimes you just don't realize how the graphics actually look. For a long time, the only difference I recognized between the HDMI and AV cables was the number of things you had to connect between the TV and the console. I was probably like 12 or 13 before my dumbass realized that the red, yellow, and white cables weren't HD. Which is weird, but it all goes to say that I didn't realize the graphics on the PS2 and the PS3 were different for a very long time. There was one occasion when my parents rented Sonic Unleashed for the PS3, and it blew my mind when my older brother told me that Sonic Unleashed was also on the PlayStation 2. How could this be? A game on the PS2 and the PS3? I'd say the closest thing to a cross-gen game that I experienced during my childhood was LEGO Star Wars. I had LEGO Star Wars 2 on the PlayStation 2, and when we got the complete saga for PS3, I was amazed. Episode 1, 2, and 3 in LEGO form, and the PS2 game is on the PS3? This is crazy! Then I saw LEGO Star Wars the video game on a shelf at a store, and it just all made sense at that moment. That the complete saga was LEGO Star Wars 1 and 2 put together. Now, a couple of years ago, I was looking at my PS3 games, and I noticed that I had Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2, but not the first game. So I had to make this right and get a copy of the first game for the PS3. Well, turns out that the game only came out on Xbox 360 and didn't receive a PS3 port. Not to worry though, because the PlayStation 2 got a port of Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. How could this be? This game isn't even on PS3, but there's a version for the last generation? Now I have to see this game. Alright, so this wasn't exactly a big surprise to me. I never actually thought that this game could be similar to its 360 counterpart in that many ways. I maybe thought they would have done something with the Ghost Recon 2 engine, because that game was already a third-person shooter and it could have created an experience closer to the 360 version. I don't really know what this is, but it was 99 cents, so I'm not really filled with buyer's remorse here. But I'm not going to hate on this game too much. It reminds me quite a bit of the Rainbow Six games on PS2, which also does remind me a bit of Rainbow Six Vegas. Like, if I was a kid and I got this game on PlayStation 2 after playing Rainbow Six Vegas, I would be like, yeah, this is Rainbow Six on PS2. Which, I mean, wouldn't have been super necessary, I guess, now that I think to the Rainbow Six games that already exist on PS2, that also do have some of the shades of Rainbow Six Vegas. Still, for a PS2 FPS game, this game works, but as a port of Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, I don't really know. I love these weird cross-gen ports though, and I can't lie, it really is fascinating to see forum posts from when these games released, and to see how annoyed people got when they got the last-gen version of a game, only for it to look completely different. You probably already know though that the PS2 sold a ton of consoles, like 160 million, and it was also one of the big 3 or 4, well, I mean, I guess 3 at the end of the day, consoles during the 6th generation, so this console was going to get some games, which meant that it was going to get a lot of ports, and something about these weird forced PS2 ports are super interesting. When the pool of supported consoles was a lot larger, there were certain games that got ports for everything, and a lot of the time these games look completely different from one another. Some ports that are kinda in this vein would be like sports games released on PS2 years after the PS3 came out. Madden got releases up to Madden 12, NBA 2K got releases up to 2K12, and SmackDown vs. Raw was released on PS2 up until 2011, before that game was acquired by 2K and changed to WWE 2K12. And FIFA got releases all the way up to FIFA 14, a game that was also released on the PS4. Now, I'm fairly certain all of these games were essentially roster updates built on a previous game's engine. Obviously, all the effort's gonna go towards the current gen versions of the games, but still, NBA 2K12 on PS2 includes the Michael Jordan mode, which again was probably just built from one of the previous game's assets, but hey, at least it's here. In FIFA's case, from what I've seen online and based on the cover arts I can see, the PS2 version of FIFA 14 was only released in some or all of Europe and some Latin American countries. Now, in Call of Duty World at War's case,
Anderson, I want some flame on that bunker. Get up that hill and get on it. Taylor, you go with him.
You've got no cover. Use a smoke grenade.
Hold on, G. Get the smoke up there! Anderson!
This game is definitely giving Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter a run for its money, but this game came out 2 years later and holy shit, I think it looks worse. Why was this created? And you know what's really weird? This game existing makes me want a PS2 port of Call of Duty 4. Since World at War was set in World War II, it was probably easier to recycle assets for a PS2 version of that game than it would have been to make all new assets for Call of Duty 4, but still, this game is freaking weird. So this game doesn't feature a multiplayer, unlike the other 3 Call of Duty games released on PS2, which all had online. This is World at War, so a lot of people might wonder if this game has zombies. No, this game doesn't have zombies either. It only features a single-player campaign. The game still features Miller, Polanski, and Roebuck for the American campaign, and does have the same soundtrack as the 7th generation version of the game.
Damn it, that's one of our birds! He's ditching! This must be Gennaro Village. We need to cut through this mess and take out those AA guns.
Japanese level the village. But sneaky bastards usually do.
Take cover in position!
But overall, this game is missing almost all of the content found in the 7th generation version of World at War, and the campaign is completely different. Yeah, I guess it's technically not called World at War. This game is World at War Final Fronts, so it technically is branded a different game, but the only thing different about the cover art of the game is the subtitle here. Everything else about this game looks like World at War. It wouldn't really make sense to rag on this game for not looking as good as the next generation of consoles, and this game doesn't look horrible, I guess, but Call of Duty 3 looks better than this game, and it came out 2 years earlier. All of this goes to say that this game is World at War in name and Sergeant Roebuck only. Similarly to how Advanced Warfighter for the PS2 and PC is the same game as Advanced Warfighter for the 360 in name and Scott Mitchell only. And the setting, I guess. But really, it would have made so much more sense to build this off of the Ghost Recon 2 engine, so that both games were at least third person. But who knows, first person shooters in the desert were really booming at that time, so maybe they felt like they couldn't go wrong with that type of game. Now some cross-gen ports that I actually really love are things like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater being released on damn near everything that was out at the time. These ones stand out to me because they still use the engines from the first 2 Pro Skater games that were released on the PS1 for example, and they create versions of Pro Skater 3 and 4 that will still run on that hardware, but will have most of the stuff from the newer entries. You look at something like even the main menu here, and stuff has been changed to make these games work on the last generation. The PS1 menu is pretty static, while the PS2 version is animated. Now, the levels on the PS1 version are almost the same, but they have been cut down and made quite a bit smaller compared to the next generation versions. On top of the maps being bigger, the PS2 can handle all of this activity going on within them. So it's able to have voice-acted NPCs to give you all these goals, and the floating icons around the map. While on PS1, you just skate up to the icon and read the description to start the goal. And the goals themselves are a lot simpler than the goals you find on the PS2. These goals are things like going for score or doing specific tricks, which can also be found on the PS2 games, but the other goals you would see that have you doing things like laying down on your board or skating over parade floats wouldn't exactly be doable on the PS1. So there's a smaller variety of goals. But on paper, a lot of the differences come down to having NPCs and voice acting to make these goals different from one another. One goal on the PS2 involves you collecting all these pink elephants in one combo line, which is pretty similar to the combo goal found in both versions of Pro Skater. There are skate goals, which are collectathons, and there are other collectathons and competitions in both versions of the game, but the NPCs breathe a lot of life and add a lot of variety to those goals. Despite the differences of these last generation ports, they are much closer to the game that they are calling themselves than something like Advanced Warfighter or World at War for PS2. Okay, it wouldn't really be right not to mention the Game Boy Advance ports of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, as they are quite different from the games that you experience on the home consoles. This gameplay is my first time trying a Game Boy Advance version of a Pro Skater game, and I'm not exactly adjusting to the viewpoint too well. Besides obviously looking very different to a home console version of the game, this port feels surprisingly good. I remember seeing gameplay of these versions over the years and thinking these games must have annoyed some kids that thought they're getting the same experience as the console version, but this is still pretty fun. The map here is a lot different than both versions of Pro Skater 4 that I've shown already, but you generally get the main area of the college map. This port is really cool though, and ended up being a lot better than I expected it to be. The next game I'm going to look at was one of my all-time favorite games growing up. I used to play the demo on PS3 over and over again until I finally got the game for the Wii a few years later. As you can see by the gameplay, it's Star Wars The Force Unleashed. The thing I didn't realize at the time though was that the version of The Force Unleashed that I played on the PlayStation 3 was not the same version that I was playing on the Wii. I had no idea though, all I knew was that I was finally playing The Force Unleashed. This last gen version of Force Unleashed is one of the better cross-gen ports of the PS2 to PS3 generation. The games are quite different, but the PS2 and Wii version is still really good. The game opens the same, putting you behind Darth Vader's mask as he hunts a Jedi on Kashyyyk, where he eventually finds the protagonist of the game, Starkiller. You find him as a young boy just after you've finished battling and killing his father. Already there are some differences that you can see right off the bat, as the PS3 and 360 version of the prologue is set during the day, while on the PS2 and Wii it's set during the nighttime. It's a minor thing, but I think I prefer the nighttime version of this level. The PS3 version looks great, but maybe the fire contrasting with the dark sky really makes the scene on Kashyyyk seem more destructive on the last gen versions of the game. The second level of the game sees Starkiller going to a TIE fighter factory where General Rom Koda is causing some problems and expects to see Vader, only to face Starkiller in battle. The events play out the same, just with different polygon counts, and Starkiller goes aboard his ship, the Rogue Shadow. Something that is completely unique to this version of the game is the Rogue Shadow area. This is the ship that Starkiller and Juno use throughout the game. And on the last gen versions of the game, this is where you do things like start missions, customize your lightsaber, change your costumes, change your force abilities, or view extras like concept art, which you unlock by collecting holocrons in the levels. You can also enter cheat codes, or view the databank, which has information about different things in the game. The PS3 and 360 versions of The Force Unleashed do include the ability to change your lightsaber color and change your costumes, bonus points for being able to change your costume mid-mission. And in case you were worried about level select being exclusive to the last gen version, you can select the levels on the PS3 and 360 as well. These menu options don't have a cool background to accompany them though, which is essentially all the Rogue Shadow is, but the menu on the next generation versions of this game is pretty basic. The third level is where these games divert again, because you are sent to the Jedi Temple where you fight a Sith with something going on called Darth Decilis. And after that, you're sent to Raxus Prime to find and kill the Jedi cast Imperatus. On the PS3, after you're done battling Koda at the TIE Fighter factory, Starkiller is sent straight to Raxus Prime to kill Paratus. This trend of diverting Starkiller's path continues in the last gen version, as this game sees you going to more locations than the PS3 version. Okay, it's only by one, but still it technically beats out the next gen versions in terms of level count. The only level not featured in the last gen version is the level where you escape from Vader's ship, the Empirical, but the PS2 includes the Jedi Temple and Corellia as unique locations. I should note that this is just the base version of The Force Unleashed I'm talking about, as the PS2 doesn't have any DLC, so it wouldn't really be fair to count the DLC levels from the PS3 version of The Force Unleashed. I prefer the PS3 and 360 version of The Force Unleashed though, as the combat and force abilities are a lot smoother. Yeah, it's true they are on newer hardware, which definitely will help, but the force abilities on the PlayStation 2 require you to hold triangle, whereas you hold R2 on the PS3. It's a lot easier to control things with the Force when you can press a shoulder button and don't have to press a face button, as I can keep both thumbs on the sticks. Yeah, I know I can play claw, but why wouldn't the game map the Force abilities to the R2 button to begin with? There are the same amount of buttons on a PS2 controller as there are on a PS3 controller, so it's a weird choice. This game looks really good for a PS2 game though, so I've got to give it props in that department. One really weird detail though is that Starkiller doesn't hold his lightsaber upside down like he does in the next gen versions of the game. I do like both, but I think I prefer the next gen choice here as well. It makes Starkiller a bit more unique, and I'm just kind of used to him holding his lightsaber that way. PS3/360/PC versions of The Force Unleashed are the main versions, I guess you could say, and I do prefer them to the version found on the PS2 and the Wii. That's not to say the last gen version is bad, cause it's not bad at all. This version of The Force Unleashed is honestly more than you could generally expect for a PS2 port of the game. It looks good, and it runs good on actual PS2 hardware, and the story is generally the same with some unique additions and changes. So those are all the cross-gen games I'm going to talk about in this video. There are a lot more games I want to talk about, and even for the games on the list, I can go a lot more in depth about them, so you can expect to see some more videos about this topic. Besides that, let me know what random cross-gen ports stand out to you. It can be from any generation too, not just like PS2 to PS3. Like Battlefield Hardline on the PS3 and 360 is kind of interesting. It's not the craziest thing to imagine, but whenever I see it I'm like, oh yeah, that game is on those consoles too. Alright, so that's all I've got for today. If you liked the video, leave a like and maybe subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Have a great day, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all later.